From Melbourne, you're watching The World from Below. I'm Lizzie O'Shea. Tonight we have a special episode of The World from Below where we are joined by Jillian C York. Jillian is a writer and an activist. She serves as the Director for International Freedom of Expression at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. The EFF is the leading non-profit organisation defending civil liberties in the digital world. Jillian works on issues of freedom of expression, privacy and digital security. So tell us a bit about the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Jillian, and the work that you do there.
Sure. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation, as you mentioned, is an organization that works on a variety of issues related to what we would call digital civil liberties. So everything from privacy to innovation to free expression. We've been around since 1990, and the bulk of our work originally was made up of impact litigation in the United States, but we've since expanded and we now also work on policymaking, grassroots activism, technology creation, and lots of international work as well.
So litigation is still part of your strategy though, and you've conducted a number of large high-profile cases. Can you tell us a bit about them?
Sure. So two of the cases that I can talk about today having to do with the NSA, the National Security Administration. One is an older case that came about after there were documents released that demonstrated that the National Security Agency was actually collaborating with AT&T, one of the US's largest telcos. That case is called Jewel versus the NSA and is a case that's done on Fourth Amendment grounds, that is around privacy. Another case, a more recent one that was filed last year, is called First Unitarian versus the NSA, and that's a lawsuit that's made up of 19 different organizations, most of which have member lists, and that lawsuit is focused on the right to freedom of association. And so basically what we're trying to do there is demonstrate that individuals or organizations have the right to keep their member lists private and free from surveillance.
I know in the past you've talked about the limitations of digital and information activists solely focusing on the right to privacy versus the right to freedom of expression and how those two interact. Can you tell me what you think are the fundamental components of proper digital citizenship?
Sure. So, I think that the right to privacy is very important, but when we talk about surveillance, we're not only talking about privacy. A lot of groups don't experience their right to privacy regularly, but at the same time, I do think that the right to freedom of association, the right to expression, those are really fundamental rights that can't be uncoupled from that right to privacy.
Do you think it's an individual's responsibility then to enforce those rights, or how does the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, aim to do that collectively, I suppose, as opposed to just seeking for individuals to enforce their rights?
Sure, yeah. So as an organization, I think that we take a really multi-pronged approach to this. One, of course, is the litigation that we talked about. Another way that we approach this issue is through policymaking, lobbying in Washington, and trying to get changes made through that process. A third way would be technology, so building technologies that help individuals evade surveillance or even get around censorship in a country. And I would say the fourth way is really through society, through trying to change the way we as a society both handle these issues and how as individuals we prevent ourselves from being surveilled. And so that's really about taking personal responsibility.
Sure. The other issue, I suppose, is that your work is not just focused on the United States. You've got a lot of experience and interest in what's happened in the Middle East of late, and particularly how the internet has been used effectively and also has caused problems for people who are active in politics in the Middle East. Can you tell us a bit about that experience that you've had in recent years and your views on how the internet's interacted with activism in the modern age?
Sure. So in 2011, when we saw all of the uprisings happening in Tunisia and Egypt and elsewhere in the region, a lot of people really kind of looked at that and saw it, as from a sort of techno-utopian stance, that the internet was really going to change the way governance worked in these countries. And really it did in the beginning. It helped people to break the fear barrier, to overcome decades of dictatorship and to organize. But at the same time, the internet's really not a panacea. And so now what we're seeing is that cat and mouse game between governments and citizens once again, but really it's been stepped up in terms of technological sophistication, and so a lot of governments have ramped up the ways in which they censor or surveil their populaces.
I do know as well that a lot of people at the time of the Arab Spring and following movements that came in its wake, that they were talked about it as a Twitter revolution or a Facebook revolution. Now, to me, that seems oversimplifying what is a very complex phenomenon. What's your view?
I agree with that. I think that what it comes down to is that stance really ignores the decades of organizing that led up to that point. I mean, while it's true that you never saw mass protests the way you did in Tahrir Square in 2011 in Egypt, at the same time there were blogs, there were Facebook groups, there were all of those things before 2011, and people were organizing against torture and for labor organizing, all sorts of different things. And so I think that while Facebook and Twitter and these tools all do really help with organizing and with sort of protest, at the same time they're not a be-all end-all solution.
Yeah, I think it sets up an interesting dynamic as well between journalists who might need the internet to report and obviously citizen journalists, for want of a better term, who might be able to report using social media. But the reality of being on the ground as well, where maybe communications aren't possible at that particular time and that you really do need to be in the street communicating with activists themselves. I mean, I think sometimes people think the internet can be a substitute for human relationships amongst activists. What do you think about that kind of idea?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think ultimately these tools helped people to organize rapidly, to spread news quickly, and to build capacity. But at the same time, when I look at my friends that spent time in Tahrir Square or in the Occupy movements, really, a lot of the core organizers of these movements knew each other already. They were already interacting. They'd already had built up decades of trust with each other. And ultimately what they were using technology for was to spread the word to people who were not involved, to build, sort of mass following.
We'll take a short break now and we'll be back to talk further with Jillian York about mass surveillance in the digital age.